A Werewolf Shifter Romance, written by Amelia Hart. Chapter 1. Buried Secrets. The manila envelope landed on Nora Wynn's mahogany desk, with a sound that seemed to echo through her 23rd floor office like a death knell. She didn't need to open it to know her carefully constructed world was about to crumble. The Sterling Industries logo embossed in gold at the corner told her everything she needed to know. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal, though she kept her expression carefully neutral. The security cameras in her corner office at Wynn & Associates captured everything, and showing weakness was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not when she was the youngest law firm CEO in the city. Not when every decision she made affected the lives of her employees, and certainly not when the contents of this envelope could destroy everything her family had built. The documents inside were damning. Bank transfers, forged signatures, shell company records spanning 7 years. Her parents had stolen over $15 million from Sterling Industries through a complex web of legal loopholes and fraudulent contracts. The evidence was irrefutable, meticulously gathered, and utterly devastating. Nora closed her eyes, transported back to that terrible night when she was 16. The phone call that changed everything. Your parents were in an accident. I'm sorry, but they didn't survive. She'd been so young, so naive, believing it was just a tragic twist of fate. Now, staring at the proof of their crimes, she wondered if it had been something far more sinister. A sharp knock interrupted her thoughts. Before she could respond, the door opened with the kind of confidence that came from owning half the city. Alexander Sterling stepped into her office like he owned it, which, given the evidence spread across her desk, he probably did. At 29, Alexander was the kind of man who commanded attention without saying a word. 6 feet 2 inches of lean muscle wrapped in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. His black hair was styled with casual precision, and those amber eyes held an intelligence that made her feel exposed, vulnerable in ways she didn't understand. "Miss Wynn," he said, his voice carrying an undertone of authority that made something deep in her chest flutter with unease. "I believe we need to talk." Nora stood, grateful for the height her heels gave her, though she still had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "Mr. Sterling, I wasn't expecting you." "No, I imagine you weren't." His eyes swept over the documents she'd spread across her desk, and she saw something flicker there. Satisfaction? Disappointment? "Though I suspect you know why I'm here." She gestured to the chair across from her desk. But he remained standing, hands clasped behind his back in a pose that radiated controlled power. The afternoon sunlight streaming through her floor-to-ceiling windows seemed to gather around him, highlighting the sharp angles of his face and the predatory stillness in his posture. "The evidence is quite thorough," Nora said, proud that her voice remained steady. "Though I have to ask why you're bringing this to me instead of the authorities." Alexander's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Because, Miss Wynn, I'm not interested in destroying what your parents built. I'm interested in preserving it." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Nora felt her pulse quicken, though she couldn't say if it was from fear or something else entirely. There was something about this man that set her on edge, made her hyper-aware of every breath, every heartbeat. "What do you want?" she asked, cutting straight to the heart of the matter. "Your parents weren't the masterminds behind this operation," Alexander continued, moving closer to her desk. "They were pawns in a much larger game. Someone fed them information, guided their actions, used them to steal from my family. That same someone has recently decided to make their theft public knowledge." Nora's blood ran cold. Public knowledge. 3 days ago, copies of these documents were sent to every major law firm in the city, along with detailed analysis of how Wynn & Associates facilitated the theft. "Your reputation, your business, everything you've worked for since your parents died, will be destroyed within the week." The room seemed to spin around her. 7 years of 18-hour days, of clawing her way up from a grieving teenager to a respected attorney, of building something meaningful from the ashes of tragedy, all of it gone. "Unless," she whispered, because there was always an unless with men like Alexander Sterling. He leaned back against her desk, close enough that she caught his scent, something woodsy and wild that made her head swim. unless you help me solve a very delicate political problem. Political? The shifter community operates on trust, Miss Wynne. Trust in bloodlines, in alliances, in the stability of our leaders. Your family has served our kind for over a century, keeping our secrets, protecting our interests. That relationship has value, even if your parents made some questionable choices near the end. Shifter community. The words confirmed what she'd always suspected, but never dared ask. Wynne and Associates had always been different from other law firms. Their clients were more than wealthy. They were powerful in ways that defied normal understanding. Meetings that happened during full moons, contracts written in languages she didn't recognize, confidentiality agreements that seemed to carry the weight of life and death. "You're offering to suppress the evidence," she said slowly. "I'm offering you a chance to restore your family's honor while solving both our problems." Alexander's amber eyes seemed to glow in the afternoon light. "Marriage, Miss Wynne. 2 years, purely business, designed to show the community that the Sterling and Wynne families have resolved their differences amicably." The words hit her like a physical blow. Marriage? A contract marriage. You continue running your firm. I continue building my empire. In public, we present a united front. In private, we maintain professional distance. After 2 years, we divorce quietly, and you're free to live your life with your reputation intact. Nora stepped back from the desk, from him, needing space to think. And if I refuse? Something dangerous flickered in Alexander's eyes. Gone so quickly she might have imagined it. Then tomorrow morning, every newspaper in the city will run front-page stories about the Wynne family's betrayal of their shifter clients. Your firm will lose every account within 48 hours. The legal community will shun you. And the people your parents stole from, people who value honor above all else, will make sure you never practice law again anywhere. The threat was delivered so casually, so matter-of-factly, that it took her breath away. This wasn't just about money or reputation. This was about survival in a world she was only beginning to understand. The shifter community, she said carefully. How extensive is it? More extensive than you realize. More powerful than you can imagine. And more dangerous than you want to discover. Alexander straightened, adjusting his cufflinks with movements that seemed deceptively casual. Your parents knew the risks when they chose to steal from us. You get to choose whether to honor their memory or let their mistakes destroy everything they tried to build. Nora stared at the evidence scattered across her desk, at the man who held her future in his hands, at the choice that wasn't really a choice at all. 2 years of her life in exchange for everything she'd worked for. A marriage of convenience to a man who radiated danger and made her pulse race with just his presence. "I need time to think," she said finally. Alexander checked his watch, a gesture that somehow managed to be both elegant and threatening. "You have until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. If you agree, we'll announce our engagement at the Meridian Gala tomorrow night. If not, the morning papers will have quite the story to tell." He moved toward the door with fluid grace, pausing only to look back at her over his shoulder. "Oh, and Miss Wynne, don't make the mistake of thinking you can run from this. There's nowhere you could go that would be beyond my reach." The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Nora alone with the wreckage of her assumptions and the impossible choice before her. Outside her windows, the city continued its daily rhythm, oblivious to the fact that her world had just been turned upside down by a man whose amber eyes seemed to see straight through her soul. She sank into her chair, staring at the documents that condemned her parents, and the business card Alexander had left behind. Sterling Industries. Alexander Sterling, CEO. In small print at the bottom, words that made her blood run cold. Serving the shifter community since 1847. 2 years. She could survive 2 years of anything, couldn't she? Chapter 2. Gilded Chains. The Meridian Hotel's grand ballroom glittered like a constellation brought to earth, crystal chandeliers casting rainbow fragments across marble floors that reflected the movements of the city's elite. Nora stood at the entrance, her hand resting lightly on Alexander's arm, feeling like an actress who'd forgotten her lines in the most important performance of her life. Her black evening gown clung to her curves with elegant simplicity, chosen specifically to make a statement without overshadowing the man beside her. Alexander wore his tuxedo like armor, every line perfectly tailored to emphasize his commanding presence. Together, they looked like the perfect power couple, a facade that made her stomach churn with nervous energy. "Smile," Alexander murmured against her ear, his breath warm against her neck. "They're watching." She didn't need him to tell her that. Every conversation had quieted when they entered. Every head had turned in their direction. The announcement of their engagement had hit the social media circuit 3 hours ago. Carefully crafted press releases painting their union as a merger of two powerful family legacies. The speed had been dizzying, but Alexander's team was nothing if not efficient. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alexander said, his voice carrying easily across the hushed ballroom, "I'd like you to meet my fiancée, Nora Wynne." The applause was polite but measured, the kind reserved for evaluating a new player in an established game. Nora felt the weight of dozens of gazes, some curious, others calculating. These weren't just wealthy business people. There was something else in the air, an undercurrent of power that made her skin prickle with unease. "Alexander, darling." A woman glided toward them, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon that spoke of old money and older bloodlines. "You've been hiding this lovely creature from us." "Margaret Rothschild," Alexander said smoothly. "May I present Nora Wynne?" "Nora." Margaret sits on the Council of Territorial Affairs. The title meant nothing to Nora, but the way several people nearby straightened slightly told her it should. Margaret extended a perfectly manicured hand, her grip surprisingly firm when Nora accepted it. "Wynne," Margaret repeated, her pale eyes sharpening. "As in Wynne and Associates? Your family has quite the reputation in our community." "Thank you," Nora replied carefully, unsure if the comment was complimentary or pointed. "Such dedication to discretion," Margaret continued, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Though I understand there have been some recent complications with the family business." The temperature in their immediate vicinity seemed to drop several degrees. Nora felt Alexander's muscles tense beneath her hand, though his expression remained perfectly composed. "Ancient history," Alexander said, his tone carrying a subtle warning that made Margaret's smile falter slightly. "The Wynne family's loyalty has never been in question." "Of course," Margaret agreed quickly, though her gaze lingered on Nora with undisguised curiosity. "How wonderful that love has conquered all obstacles." Love. The word hung in the air between them like a challenge. Nora forced herself to lean slightly into Alexander's side, playing her part in their elaborate charade. "We prefer to focus on the future," Nora said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Building something stronger together than we could apart." "How refreshingly practical," said a new voice, smooth and cultured, but with an edge that made Nora's pulse quicken. She turned to find a man approaching, late 30s with silver threads in his dark hair and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of her appearance. "James Morrison, pleased to meet you. I represent certain interests in the Territory Management Division." Another title that sounded important in ways she didn't understand. Alexander's grip on her hand tightened almost imperceptibly. "James," Alexander acknowledged with polite coolness. "I wasn't expecting to see you tonight." "Oh, I wouldn't miss it," James replied, his gaze fixed on Nora. "It's not every day that such an unexpected alliance is announced. Tell me, Miss Wynne, what convinced you that Mr. Sterling was worthy of your family's trust?" The question was loaded with implications she couldn't quite grasp, but the challenge in his tone was unmistakable. Around them, conversations had quieted again, as if the entire room was waiting for her answer. "Perhaps," Nora said carefully, "the question should be what convinced him that I was worthy of his." Something flashed in James's eyes, surprise or approval. She couldn't tell which. Several people nearby exchanged glances, and she caught fragments of whispered conversations in languages that didn't sound entirely human. "Interesting," James murmured. "Very interesting indeed." Alexander's hand moved to the small of her back, the touch warm through the silk of her dress, but somehow possessive in a way that made her breath catch. "If you'll excuse us," he said smoothly. "I promised Nora a dance." He guided her toward the dance floor without waiting for a response, his movements fluid and confident. Other couples made space for them as they took position in the center of the floor, the orchestra beginning a waltz that seemed to emphasize their every movement. "You did well," Alexander murmured as he pulled her into his arms, one hand at her waist, the other engulfing her fingers. "James was testing you." "Testing me for what?" she asked, acutely aware of how perfectly she fit against him, how his scent seemed to wrap around her like an embrace. "To see if you understand the rules of the game we're playing." His amber eyes caught the light as they moved, and for a moment she felt dizzy, lost in depths that seemed to swirl with golden fire. "These people aren't just wealthy, Nora. They're part of something much older, much more complex than normal society. The shifter community," she said quietly, the words feeling strange on her tongue. "The territorial elite," Alexander corrected. "Alphas and their families, council members, those who make decisions that affect thousands of lives. They're evaluating whether you're strong enough to be part of their world." His hand tightened on her waist as he spun her in a move that brought their bodies closer together, her free hand coming to rest on his shoulder. She could feel the solid muscle beneath his jacket, the heat radiating from his skin, and something else. Something that made every nerve ending in her body come alive with awareness. "Strong enough how?" she managed to ask, though speaking was becoming difficult as the dance continued. "Watch," Alexander said softly. She followed his gaze to see James Morrison approaching an elderly man near the bar. As James spoke, the older man's posture straightened, his head tilting slightly to the side in a gesture that looked almost submissive. "James just gave him an order," Alexander explained, his voice barely audible over the music. "And he obeyed without question. How is that possible?" "Authority," Alexander said simply. "Some people are born to lead, others to follow. It's not conscious, not deliberate, but it's as real as gravity." As if to demonstrate his point, a waiter appeared at the edge of the dance floor, offering champagne without being summoned. Alexander didn't even look at him, simply nodded slightly, and the man retreated immediately. "You didn't say anything," Nora observed, increasingly aware of the strange undercurrents flowing through the ballroom around them. "I didn't need to." Alexander's eyes met hers again, and she felt that strange flutter in her chest, as if something inside her was responding to him on a level deeper than conscious thought. Some things don't require words. The dance ended, but he didn't immediately release her. For a moment they stood there, her hand still in his arm still around her waist, while the rest of the room seemed to fade into background noise. She was intensely aware of his proximity, of the way her pulse had accelerated, of the heat building low in her belly that had nothing to do with the crowded ballroom. "Nora," he said, and her name on his lips sounded different somehow, weighted with meaning she couldn't interpret. "Mr. Sterling." A bright voice cut through whatever moment they'd been sharing, and Nora stepped back as a young woman approached them. Blonde, beautiful, with the kind of effortless elegance that spoke of good breeding and better connections. What a lovely surprise. Alexander's expression shuddered immediately, his professional mask sliding back into place. "Victoria, I didn't realize you were back from Europe." Victoria. The name sent a chill down Nora's spine, though she couldn't say why. The woman looked harmless enough, dressed in a stunning red gown that complemented her fair complexion. But something about her smile set Nora's teeth on edge. "I couldn't stay away once I heard the news," Victoria said, her gaze flicking to Nora with barely concealed assessment. "You must be the famous Nora Wynne. How delightful to finally meet you." The word "finally" carried implications that made Nora's skin crawl, but she maintained her composure. "I'm afraid you have me at a disadvantage," she said politely. "Victoria Pemberton," the woman replied, extending her hand with practiced grace. "Alexander and I go way back, don't we, darling?" The endearment hung in the air like a poisoned dart, and Nora felt Alexander tense beside her. Whatever history these two shared, it was complicated and recent enough to still sting. "Ancient history," Alexander said coolly, echoing his earlier dismissal of Margaret's probing questions. Victoria laughed, a sound like silver bells that somehow managed to be entirely without warmth. "Oh, Alexander. Always so dramatic. Though I have to say, your choice in fiancé is unexpected." "In what way?" Nora asked, her voice carefully neutral despite the irritation building in her chest. Victoria's smile sharpened. Well, considering the family circumstances, I would have thought Alexander might prefer someone with a more stable background. But then again, love makes fools of us all, doesn't it? The insult was delivered with such sweet precision that it took Nora's breath away. Around them, she was suddenly aware of listening ears, watching eyes, waiting to see how she would respond to the challenge. Stability is overrated, Nora replied evenly. I find that the most interesting people are those who've faced adversity and chosen to rise above it rather than hiding behind their family names. Victoria's expression flickered, just for a moment, revealing something sharp and dangerous beneath her perfect facade. How wonderfully philosophical, she said. I do hope philosophy will be enough when the real challenges begin. Before Nora could ask what she meant, Victoria had melted back into the crowd, leaving behind the lingering scent of expensive perfume and unspoken threats. Alexander was watching her with an unreadable expression, his amber eyes intense in the ballroom's golden light. Old girlfriend? Nora asked, trying to keep her tone light. Something like that, Alexander replied, his jaw tight. Nothing you need to worry about. But as they made their way through the rest of the evening's introductions and polite conversations, Nora couldn't shake the feeling that Victoria Pemberton was exactly the kind of problem she should be worried about. Chapter 3. Unexpected Sanctuaries. The Sterling Mansion's East Wing had been transformed into Nora's temporary prison, though prison seemed an inadequate word for the luxury that surrounded her. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked manicured gardens that stretched toward a private lake, while antique furniture and priceless artwork created an atmosphere of refined elegance that should have been soothing. Instead, she felt like a butterfly pinned to a display case, beautiful and trapped. 3 days had passed since the gala, and the media attention had been relentless. Photos of her and Alexander dominated social media feeds, their carefully choreographed romance dissected by bloggers and tabloid journalists who had no idea they were witnessing an elaborate performance. The business world had responded with cautious optimism, Sterling Industries' stock climbing steadily as investors interpreted the union as a sign of expansion and stability. What they didn't know was that Nora and Alexander had barely spoken since their return from the Meridian. He disappeared each morning before dawn, returning long after she'd retired to her suite. Their only interactions came through his personal assistant, a frighteningly efficient woman named Patricia, who delivered schedules, wardrobe selections, and instructions with military precision. "Miss Wynne," Patricia announced from the doorway of the sitting room where Nora had been reviewing contracts for Wynne and Associates. "Mr. Sterling requests your presence in the garden pavilion." Requests, as if she had any choice in the matter. Nora closed her laptop and smoothed the wrinkles from her cream-colored dress, wondering what new performance would be required of her today. The garden pavilion sat beside the lake, its white columns and flowering vines creating the perfect backdrop for romantic encounters. Alexander stood with his back to her, his attention fixed on something in the distance. Even in casual clothes, dark jeans and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms, he radiated an authority that made her pulse quicken despite her irritation. "You wanted to see me?" she asked, keeping her voice carefully neutral. He turned, and she caught her breath at the intensity in his amber eyes. There was something different about him out here, away from the formal settings where they usually encountered each other. Something wilder, less controlled. "We need to discuss the council meeting tomorrow night," he said, gesturing to a wrought iron table set for two. "There are things you need to know before you meet them formally." Nora took the offered seat, acutely aware of his proximity as he settled across from her. A light breeze carried his scent, that same woodsy essence that seemed to scramble her thoughts and make her skin warm in ways she didn't want to examine too closely. "Let me guess," she said, accepting the glass of wine he poured. "More tests to see if I'm worthy of their approval?" Something like that. Alexander's lips curved in what might have been amusement. "The Council of Territorial Affairs oversees all major decisions affecting the shifter community. Alliances, business partnerships, territorial disputes. Your acceptance by them legitimizes our marriage in ways that matter beyond public opinion. And if they don't accept me?" Alexander was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the wine in his glass. "They will," They have to. Something in his tone made her study his face more carefully. Why? What aren't you telling me? He met her eyes, and she saw vulnerability there. Quickly masked, but unmistakably real. The Alpha King position doesn't just go to the strongest candidate, Nora. It goes to the one who demonstrates the best leadership qualities, the ability to unite rather than divide. A stable partnership, a mate who can navigate the political complexities of our world. These things matter as much as physical dominance. So I'm your political asset, she said, surprised by the sharp disappointment that cut through her chest. You're more than that. The words came out rougher than she expected, and Alexander seemed as surprised by them as she was. He cleared his throat, regaining his composure. You handled Victoria's challenge perfectly the other night. Most people would have been intimidated by her connections, her history in our circles. What history? Nora asked, setting down her wine glass. Who is she to you? Alexander was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. Victoria and I were engaged 2 years ago. It was expected. Our families had been planning the alliance since we were children. She comes from old bloodlines, understands the complexities of leadership, would have made an acceptable partner. What happened? I called it off 6 months before the wedding. Alexander's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I realized I couldn't spend my life with someone I didn't respect, regardless of political convenience. There was more to the story. She could sense it in the tension that radiated from him, but she didn't push. Instead, she found herself studying the strong line of his profile, the way the afternoon sunlight caught the black silk of his hair, the controlled power in his posture even in casual conversation. Why me? She asked suddenly. If you needed a politically advantageous marriage, there must have been other options. Women who actually understand your world. Alexander turned to look at her fully, his amber eyes intense in the golden light. Because when I gave you a direct command at the gala, you resisted it. Nora blinked, confused. I don't understand. When I told you to smile, to watch the room, to respond to questions in certain ways, part of you pushed back against the compulsion. You followed my lead because you chose to, not because you had to. His voice dropped lower, almost wondering. Do you have any idea how rare that is? A chill ran down her spine. Compulsion? Most people, when faced with alpha authority, submit automatically. It's not conscious, not deliberate, but it's absolute. You felt it. I could see the struggle in your eyes, but you maintained your own will underneath the cooperation. Alexander leaned forward slightly, his gaze never leaving her face. That kind of mental strength is exactly what I need in a partner. Nora's mind reeled as she processed his words. The strange sensations she'd felt at the gala, the way her body had seemed to respond to his unspoken commands while her mind remained independently focused. It hadn't been imagination. It had been some form of supernatural influence that she'd somehow partially resisted. What are you? She whispered. Before Alexander could respond, a commotion from the direction of the house caught their attention. Patricia appeared on the garden path, her usual composed demeanor fractured by obvious distress. Mr. Sterling, she called, her voice tight with urgency. Alpha King Edmund is on the phone. He says it's about the Morrison situation. Alexander was on his feet instantly, his entire posture shifting into something that looked genuinely dangerous. How bad? He's requesting an emergency council session for tonight instead of tomorrow. And sir? Patricia glanced at Nora uncertainly. He specifically requested that Miss Wynne attend. The wineglass slipped from Nora's suddenly nerveless fingers, shattering against the stone patio with a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the tense silence that followed. Alexander's attention snapped back to her, and she saw something in his expression that looked almost like fear. What's the Morrison situation? She managed to ask. James Morrison has formally challenged the legitimacy of our engagement, Alexander said, his voice carefully controlled. He's claiming that your family's recent difficulties make you unfit to be the mate of a potential Alpha King. Nora felt the blood drain from her face. Can he do that? He can try. Alexander moved around the table to her side, offering his hand to help her stand. When their skin made contact, she felt that strange electric sensation again. Stronger now, as if his touch was awakening something deep inside her that had been sleeping. "But Nora, you need to understand something. If the council rules against us, if they decide you're not suitable, the consequences go beyond just our arrangement." She looked up at him, seeing the grim truth in his amber eyes. "They'll destroy me completely. They'll make your parents' theft public in ways that will ensure you never recover. Your law firm will be blacklisted from every major client in the city, and without the protection our engagement provides, other enemies your family made over the years will feel free to settle old scores." The implications hit her like a physical blow. She'd thought the choice was between 2 years of marriage or professional ruin. Now she realized it was between success as Alexander's wife or complete destruction of everything her family had ever built. "How do I convince them I'm suitable?" she asked, proud that her voice remained steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. Alexander's hand tightened on hers, and she felt heat flow between them, steadying and strengthening her in ways that defied rational explanation. "By being exactly who you are, by showing them that you're strong enough to stand beside an alpha king, smart enough to navigate their political games, and brave enough to face whatever challenges come our way." He paused, studying her face intently. "But Nora, there's something else you should know before tonight. Something about your family's connection to our world that goes deeper than just legal services." Patricia cleared her throat delicately from the pathway. "Sir, the Alpha King is holding for your response." "Tell him we'll be there," Alexander said, without taking his eyes off Nora. "And Patricia? Have the car ready in 30 minutes. We're going to need time to prepare." As they walked back toward the house, Alexander's hand still clasping hers, Nora felt as if she were stepping across a threshold she could never recross. Whatever secrets he was about to reveal, whatever truths about her family's history he'd been hiding, she had the feeling they would change everything she thought she knew about herself. The council would decide her fate tonight, but first she had to survive learning who she really was. Chapter 4. Dangerous Truths. The council chamber occupied the top floor of a downtown building that appeared unremarkable from the street, its glass facade reflecting the city lights like any other corporate office. But the moment Nora stepped from the private elevator, she knew she'd entered a world that operated by entirely different rules. The circular room was designed to intimidate, with towering windows that offered a panoramic view of the city below, and a curved table where 12 figures sat in judgment. Ancient symbols were carved into the dark wood paneling, and the air itself seemed to thrum with an energy that made her skin prickle with awareness. These weren't just wealthy business people. They were apex predators in human form, and she was walking into their territory as prey. Alexander's hand found the small of her back as they approached the center of the room, his touch both steadying and possessive. He wore his authority like a second skin here, moving with predatory grace that made several council members straighten in their seats. "Alexander," said a commanding voice from the head of the table. Alpha King Edmund Voss was smaller than Nora had expected, perhaps 5'10" with silver hair and weathered features, but the power that radiated from him made the spacious room feel suddenly confined. "And this must be Miss Wynne, Your Majesty," Nora said, offering a slight bow that felt both natural and necessary. Edmund's pale eyes studied her with unsettling intensity. "Please, sit. We have much to discuss." 2 chairs had been positioned facing the curved table, clearly designed to make them feel like defendants awaiting judgment. As they settled, Nora became acutely aware of the watching eyes, the subtle sense in the air that her brain couldn't quite process, the undercurrent of barely controlled power that seemed to pulse from every direction. "James Morrison has raised concerns about this union," Edmund continued, his voice carrying easily through the chamber. "Concerns that warrant serious consideration." James stepped forward from his position near the windows, his expression carefully composed but his eyes glittering with satisfaction. "The Wynne family's recent betrayal of their clients raises questions about genetic reliability, character flaws that could compromise the integrity of our leadership structure." "Genetic reliability?" Nora's voice came out sharper than she'd intended, and several council members shifted in their seats. "Are you suggesting that my parents' mistakes reflect some hereditary defect?" "I'm suggesting," James replied smoothly, "that patterns of behavior often run in bloodlines. Your parents were trusted with our most sensitive secrets, and chose personal gain over loyalty. What assurance do we have that their daughter won't follow the same path when faced with difficult choices? The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Nora felt Alexander tense beside her, could sense his restraint as he fought the urge to defend her. This was her moment, her test, and they both knew it. "You're absolutely right," Nora said, rising from her chair to face the council directly. "My parents made terrible choices that betrayed the trust your community placed in them. But if we're discussing genetic patterns, let's be thorough." She moved closer to the table, meeting each council member's gaze in turn. The Wynn family has served the shifter community for over a century. 4 generations of lawyers who kept your secrets, protected your interests, and asked for nothing more than the privilege of being useful. My great-great-grandfather helped establish the legal frameworks that still protect your anonymity today. My grandfather died protecting client confidentiality when government investigators tried to force him to reveal shifter identities during the paranormal registration attempts of the 1960s. Margaret Rothschild leaned forward slightly, interest flickering in her pale eyes. "You know our history." "I know my history," Nora corrected. 7 years of wondering why my parents' clients were so different, so protective, so loyal even after the scandal broke. 7 years of running a law firm that should have failed, but somehow kept attracting the most powerful people in the city. I may not have understood what you all were, but I never stopped serving your interests. "Pretty words," James interjected, "but words don't erase the fundamental problem. She's human, Edmund. Weak, short-lived, incapable of producing heirs who can truly carry on alpha bloodlines. How can we entrust our future to someone who isn't even part of our species?" Something cold and sharp flowed through Nora's chest at the casual dismissal. "You're right," she said quietly. "I am human, but I'm also the woman who's been protecting your legal interests for 7 years without fully understanding what I was protecting. I'm the person who could have exposed every one of you after my parents died, when I was angry and grieving and desperate for answers. Instead, I chose loyalty to clients I didn't even know were shifters." She turned to face Alexander, seeing something like pride burning in his amber eyes. "And I'm the woman your future Alpha King chose. Not because I'm powerful or politically connected, but because I'm strong enough to stand beside him without being overwhelmed by what he is. Demonstrate that strength," Edmund said suddenly, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Alexander, give her a direct command." Something she would naturally resist. Alexander's face went rigid. "Edmund, I don't think—" "Now!" the Alpha King commanded, his voice carrying a weight of authority that made every person in the room go still. Alexander stood slowly, his movements predatory and deliberate. When he spoke, his voice carried an undertone of power that seemed to reverberate through Nora's bones. "Kneel!" The command hit her like a physical force, pressing down on her shoulders, making her knees want to buckle. Every instinct screamed at her to obey, to drop to the floor and submit to the dominance radiating from the man she was supposed to marry. The compulsion was overwhelming, irresistible, absolute. Except it wasn't. Nora felt the pressure, acknowledged it, then set her jaw and remained standing. "No!" Gasps echoed through the chamber. Several council members half rose from their seats, their faces shocked. James Morrison's mouth fell open in undisguised amazement. "Remarkable," Edmund breathed. "Alexander, increase the pressure." Alexander's eyes flashed with genuine gold, no longer entirely human. When he spoke again, the command carried enough force to make the windows rattle. "Kneel, Nora. Now." The compulsion slammed into her like a tidal wave, making her vision blur and her breath catch. Sweat broke out across her forehead as she fought against the supernatural pressure trying to force her to the ground. Her hands shook with the effort of resistance, and she could feel something inside her chest responding to his power, recognizing it, wanting to answer it, but her will remained her own. "No," she repeated, her voice steadier than she felt. "I choose to stand." Edmund began to laugh, a sound of genuine delight that filled the chamber. "Extraordinary. In 3 centuries, I have never seen a human resist alpha compulsion so completely." "She's not entirely human," said a new voice from the shadows near the back of the room. An elderly woman stepped forward, her silver hair braided with small bones and feathers, her eyes the pale blue of winter ice. The old blood runs in her veins, faint but present. Nora's leg suddenly felt weak, not from the compulsion but from shock. "What are you talking about?" "The Wynn line carries wolfless shifter genetics," the woman continued, her voice carrying an accent that seemed older than the English language itself. "Dormant for generations, bred so thin most would never suspect. But it's there. That's why you can resist alpha commands, why you feel the pull of the supernatural world so strongly." The revelation hit Nora like a physical blow. Everything she'd believed about her identity, her humanity, her place in the world, crumbling in an instant. "That's impossible." "Is it?" Alexander asked softly, moving closer to her. "Think about it, Nora. Your family's century-long dedication to serving our kind, your natural ability to keep our secrets, your resistance to compulsion. Doesn't it make more sense than coincidence?" "Wolfless shifters are incredibly rare," Edmund added, his eyes bright with interest. "Most die out within a few generations because they can't shift, can't fully access their supernatural heritage. But occasionally, under the right circumstances, the dormant abilities can awaken." "What circumstances?" Nora whispered, though part of her already knew the answer. "A true mate bond with a powerful alpha," the elderly woman replied. "The kind of connection that transcends political convenience or physical attraction. Soul-deep recognition that awakens what was always meant to be." Nora's gaze snapped to Alexander, seeing something in his expression that made her heart race for entirely new reasons. The attraction she'd been fighting, the electric sensation whenever they touched, the way her body seemed to respond to his presence even when her mind remained independent. It wasn't just chemistry, it was recognition. "The vote," Edmund announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent chamber, "will be unanimous. Alexander Sterling, your choice of mate is approved by this council. The engagement is formally recognized." James Morrison's face went white with fury, but he said nothing. Around the room, council members nodded their agreement, some with satisfaction, others with calculation. "However," Edmund continued, his pale eyes fixed on Nora, "Miss Wynn will need guidance in awakening her dormant heritage. The mate bond is only the beginning. Full acceptance of what she is will require training, preparation, and considerable courage. I'll see that she receives everything she needs," Alexander said, his voice rough with an emotion Nora couldn't identify. As the council session concluded and members began filing out, Nora remained frozen in place, overwhelmed by the revelations that had just shattered her understanding of reality. Alexander's hand found hers, his touch sending that familiar electric shock through her system. But now she understood what it meant. Not just attraction, recognition. Her dormant supernatural heritage responding to the presence of her true mate. "Nora," Alexander said softly, his amber eyes intense in the chamber's dim lighting. "Are you all right?" She looked at him. This man who'd burst into her carefully ordered life and turned everything upside down, who'd offered her marriage as a business arrangement but looked at her now like she was the most precious thing in the world. "Ask me tomorrow," she said finally, "after I've had time to process the fact that apparently I'm not human, and you're my supernatural soulmate." Alexander's smile was slow and devastating. "For what it's worth, I'm glad the council approved. I was beginning to think I might have to fight them all to keep you." The casual admission sent heat spiraling through her chest, followed immediately by the terrifying realization that she wouldn't have wanted him to lose that fight. Somewhere between blackmail and compulsion resistance, between political performance and supernatural revelation, she'd begun to care about Alexander Sterling in ways that had nothing to do with their arrangement. And judging by the intensity in his gaze, the feeling was entirely mutual. Chapter 5. Shattered Illusions. Nora stood in the middle of Alexander's private study, holding the folder that had just destroyed what remained of her carefully constructed reality. Her hands trembled as she stared at the photographs, police reports, and investigative summaries that painted a picture she'd never wanted to see clearly. "You knew?" she whispered, her voice barely audible in the mahogany-paneled room. "You knew they were murdered." Alexander sat behind his massive desk, his face a mask of controlled composure that only made her fury burn brighter. The morning sun streaming through the tall windows highlighted the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he held himself as if preparing for an attack. "Yes," he said simply. The admission hit her like a physical blow. For 2 weeks, she'd been living in his house, sharing meals with him, beginning to trust him, even starting to believe that perhaps their arrangement could become something real. And all the while, he'd known the truth about her parents' death and chosen to keep it from her. "Victoria Pemberton's father ordered their execution," she continued, reading from the investigator's report with a voice that grew steadier with each word. "Thomas Pemberton discovered their theft 6 months before they died. Instead of exposing them immediately, he decided to eliminate the evidence and save the information for political leverage. Nora, don't." She slammed the folder shut, the sound echoing through the study like a gunshot. 7 years, Alexander. 7 years I've believed it was an accident. 7 years I've carried guilt for not being a better daughter, for not somehow preventing their deaths. And you've known the truth this entire time. Alexander stood, moving around the desk with that predatory grace that had once fascinated her, but now seemed threatening. "I had the investigation conducted 3 years ago when I learned about the theft. I wanted to understand what really happened. Why your parents would risk everything. And you never thought to tell me?" Nora backed toward the door, needing space between them. "Even when you blackmailed me into this marriage, even when I told you about the guilt I carried, you said nothing. What would you have done with the information?" Alexander's voice carried a sharp edge now, his amber eyes flashing with something that looked like gold in the morning light. "Thomas Pemberton died in a hunting accident 2 years ago. There's no justice to be served, no closure to be found. Telling you would have accomplished nothing except causing more pain. That wasn't your choice to make." The words tore from her throat with more force than she'd intended, and she saw Alexander flinch slightly. "Those were my parents, my grief, my right to know the truth. You had no authority to decide what I could or couldn't handle. I was protecting you. You were controlling me." Nora's laugh was bitter, broken. "Just like you control everyone else in your life. Just like you've been controlling me since the moment you walked into my office with your impossible ultimatum." Alexander's face went very still. The kind of dangerous quiet that made her instincts scream warnings she was too angry to heed. "Is that what you think this is? Control? Isn't it?" She gestured toward the folder, toward the evidence of his deception. "You investigated my family without my knowledge, kept the truth about their murder from me, manipulated me into a marriage I never would have agreed to if I'd known the real stakes. What would you call it?" "Protection," Alexander said, his voice dropping to a growl that made something deep in her chest respond despite her fury. "Care for someone too stubborn to accept help when she needs it. Ensuring that the woman I—" He stopped abruptly, jaw clenching as if he'd said more than he intended. "The woman you what?" Nora demanded, stepping closer despite every rational instinct telling her to flee. "The woman you needed for political advancement? The woman whose family heritage made her useful for your ambitions? The woman I've fallen in love with," Alexander said quietly, the words hitting the air between them like dropped stones. "Despite every logical reason why I shouldn't, despite knowing you'd probably hate me when you learned the truth, despite the fact that our entire relationship started as a lie." The confession stopped her cold, all her righteous anger freezing in her chest. She stared at him, searching his face for signs of manipulation, of calculated emotional warfare, but found only raw honesty that made her heart clench with unwanted longing. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't say things like that now, not when—" The study door burst open, and Patricia rushed in with uncharacteristic urgency. "Mr. Sterling, Alpha King Edmund is on the secure line. He says it's about the succession announcement." Alexander's attention snapped to his assistant, his body going rigid. "Now? He's calling an emergency session for tonight. All potential candidates are being summoned immediately." Patricia's gaze flickered to Nora, uncertainty clear in her expression. "He specifically mentioned that this concerns recent intelligence about threats to the territory." Nora felt the blood drain from her face. Edmund had mentioned that Alexander was one of 3 candidates for the Alpha King position, but she'd assumed the selection process would take months, not days. "Intelligence?" Alexander asked, already moving toward his desk phone. "The Morrison faction has been gathering support from neighboring territories. There are rumors of an alliance being formed against your candidacy specifically. Patricia glanced at Nora again. And, sir? There have been incidents involving Miss Wynn's security detail. What kind of incidents? The authority in Alexander's voice made the air itself seem to vibrate with tension. 2 of our perimeter guards were found unconscious this morning. No injuries, but they have no memory of what happened. Professional work, Alpha. Someone wanted access to the estate and had the skills to get it. Nora's legs suddenly felt weak. Someone was trying to get to me. Alexander was beside her in an instant, his hands gripping her shoulders with gentle strength. You're safe. No one got close to the house, and our interior security was never compromised. But even as he said the words, she could see the worry in his amber eyes, the way his jaw tightened with protective fury. The political games she'd thought were distant, abstract threats were suddenly very real and very personal. I need to go, she said, pulling away from his touch. I need time to think, to process everything that's happened. Nora, you can't leave now. Not with threats against you. Not with the council session tonight. I can't stay either. She moved toward the door, desperate for space, for air, for somewhere she could think clearly without Alexander's presence scrambling her thoughts. I need to go back to my apartment, to my office, somewhere that feels real. It's not safe. Nothing about this is safe. The words exploded from her with all the force of her accumulated fear and confusion. Not the threats. Not the politics. Not whatever this thing is between us that I can't think straight around. I need distance, Alexander. I need to figure out who I am, when I'm not drowning in supernatural politics and mate bonds and all the other impossible things you've brought into my life. Alexander's face went carefully blank, but she caught the flash of pain that flickered through his eyes. If that's what you need. The easy acquiescence somehow hurt worse than if he'd argued with her. She stared at him, this man who'd turned her world upside down, who'd lied to her and protected her and claimed to love her all in the same breath. The council session. We'll proceed as planned, Alexander finished. I'll handle Edmund's questions about your absence. And us? Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on something beyond the tall windows. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. When you're ready to talk, you know where to find me. As Nora walked out of the study, out of the Sterling mansion, out of the carefully protected world Alexander had built around her, she felt something tear in her chest, physical pain that had nothing to do with her broken heart, and everything to do with the supernatural connection she was only beginning to understand. By the time she reached her car, the pain had intensified to a sharp ache that made it difficult to breathe. She drove through the city streets with white knuckles and blurred vision, telling herself it was just emotional distress, just the trauma of learning the truth about her parents' murder. But as the distance between her and Alexander grew, as the mate bond stretched and strained against the separation, Nora began to understand that some connections couldn't be severed by anger or betrayal or even conscious choice. Some bonds, once forged, became part of your very survival. She was about to learn just how dangerous it was to test the limits of such connections. Chapter 6. Blood and Fire. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city should have been Nora's first warning that something was wrong. When the text message had arrived on her phone claiming to be from a former client with urgent information about her parents' real killer, she should have ignored it. When the address led her to an industrial district she'd never seen before, she should have turned around. Instead, driven by 3 days of consuming rage and the desperate need for answers that made sense, she'd walked straight into the trap. Now, zip-tied to a metal chair in the center of the concrete space, watching Victoria Pemberton pace in front of her like a predator savoring the hunt, Nora realized just how badly she'd underestimated the dangers of the world she'd been thrust into. You really are as naive as you look, Victoria said, her red hair catching the light from the industrial fixtures hanging overhead. She'd traded her elegant gowns for practical black clothing, but somehow managed to look even more dangerous in combat gear than she had in couture. Did you honestly think you could just walk away from Alexander Sterling and live happily ever after? I wasn't walking away permanently, Nora said, testing the strength of her restraints. The plastic ties bit into her wrists, but there was no give in them. I needed time to think. Time to think, Victoria repeated. with a laugh that held no warmth. How wonderfully human of you, always believing you have the luxury of choice in matters that have already been decided by forces beyond your comprehension. The warehouse felt larger in the darkness beyond the overhead lights, full of shadows that could hide anything. Nora could hear movement in the periphery, footsteps and whispered conversations that suggested Victoria hadn't come alone. "What do you want?" Nora asked, forcing her voice to remain steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. Victoria stopped pacing, turning to face her with eyes that gleamed with satisfaction. "What I've always wanted. Alexander Sterling to pay for his arrogance in choosing a nobody over me, and for you to understand exactly what happens to humans who overreach their station. If this is about wounded pride, this is about survival." Victoria snapped, her composed mask slipping to reveal something vicious underneath. "Do you have any idea what your little engagement has cost me? The alliances that were broken when Alexander rejected me for you? The territories that have withdrawn their support because I'm no longer seen as a viable political partner?" Nora stared at her, beginning to understand the scope of what she'd stumbled into. "You're not just angry about the broken engagement. You're angry about the power you lost. Everything I worked for, every connection I cultivated, every plan I made for my future, destroyed because Alexander Sterling decided to play house with a wolfless freak instead of honoring his commitments to his own kind." The casual cruelty of the words stung. But beneath the hurt, Nora felt something else beginning to stir, a warmth in her chest, a tingling awareness that seemed to spread outward from her core. The same sensation she'd felt when Alexander used his alpha compulsion, but stronger now, more insistent. "So you're going to kill me," Nora said, keeping Victoria talking while she tried to understand what was happening to her body. "Oh, killing you would be far too simple," Victoria replied, pulling a chair closer and settling across from her captive. "No, I'm going to let Alexander choose. You, or his chance at becoming Alpha King." "What are you talking about?" Victoria smiled, showing teeth that seemed sharper than they should be. "Right now, Alexander is sitting in an emergency council session, competing for the position that should have been guaranteed if he'd made better choices in mates. The selection process has been accelerated due to certain pressures on the current leadership." The warmth in Nora's chest intensified, accompanied by a strange pulling sensation, as if something inside her was trying to reach towards something distant. Alexander. Somehow she was becoming aware of Alexander's location, his emotional state, even his physical condition. "He doesn't know you're missing yet," Victoria continued, "but he will soon. And when he does, he'll have to choose between abandoning the most important political meeting of his life to save you, or staying to compete for the crown while you die slowly in this warehouse. You're insane if you think—" "I think Alexander Sterling is exactly the kind of man who would sacrifice everything for a woman he believes he loves," Victoria interrupted. "And I think you're exactly the kind of burden who would let him." The accusation hit harder than any physical blow. Nora thought about Alexander's confession, about the pain in his eyes when she'd walked away, about all the ways she'd complicated his life since the moment he'd made his impossible bargain. "But here's what makes this particularly delicious," Victoria went on, rising from her chair to resume her predatory pacing. "Even if Alexander chooses to save you, even if he abandons his political future to play the hero, it won't matter. Because by the time he gets here, you'll already be dead." The pulling sensation in Nora's chest suddenly intensified into sharp pain, as if someone had hooked a line to her ribs and was tugging hard enough to crack bone. She gasped, doubling over as much as her restraints allowed. "Ah," Victoria said with satisfaction. "There it is, the mate bond beginning to strain. Distance is hard enough on new connections, but emotional trauma makes it so much worse." "What are you doing to me?" "I'm not doing anything. Your own supernatural heritage is killing you." Victoria knelt beside Nora's chair, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Wolfless shifters are fragile creatures, dependent on their mates for stability once the bond forms. Separate them too far, cause them enough distress, and their bodies simply shut down." The pain was getting worse, spreading from her chest through her limbs like fire. Nora could feel her heart racing, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid. Around the edges of her vision, darkness was beginning to creep in. "The beautiful irony," Victoria continued, is that Alexander could save you simply by being here. His presence would stabilize the bond, ease the physiological stress, but he doesn't know you're in trouble. And by the time he figures it out, it'll be too late. He'll come, Nora managed through gritted teeth. Maybe, but first he'll have to realize you're missing, then figure out where you are, then get here before the bond stress kills you. All while missing the most important political opportunity of his life. Victoria's smile was triumphant. Either way, I win. Either he loses his chance at the crown saving you, or he loses you trying to claim it. The pain spiked again, and Nora felt something shift inside her chest, as if a crucial connection was beginning to fray. But with the agony came something else, something that felt like electricity running beneath her skin. Her senses sharpened suddenly, allowing her to hear heartbeats in the darkness beyond the lights, to smell the fierce sweat of Victoria's accomplices, to feel the subtle vibrations of movement through the concrete floor. "You made one mistake," Nora said, her voice steadier than it had any right to be given the fire consuming her from within. "Oh? And what's that?" "You assumed I was helpless." The plastic zip ties snapped like paper as strength flooded through Nora's arms. She surged to her feet, the metal chair clattering away behind her, and Victoria stumbled backward in shock. "Impossible," Victoria breathed. "You're wolfless. I can't shift," Nora agreed, flexing her hands and watching in amazement as her fingernails extended into claws that gleamed in the industrial lighting. "But apparently I can do this." The transformation was unlike anything she could have imagined. Not the full shift that true shifters experienced, but something else. Something that enhanced her human form with supernatural strength and speed, while leaving her fundamentally herself. Her senses exploded outward, mapping the warehouse in perfect detail, identifying the locations of 5 other people hiding in the shadows. "Get her!" Victoria screamed, backing toward the darkness. 3 men emerged from the shadows, moving with inhuman speed, their eyes glowing with the reflected light of predators. But Nora was faster now, her enhanced reflexes allowing her to dodge their attacks and counter with strength that sent them flying into concrete walls with sickening thuds. The 4th attacker came at her from behind, but she spun and caught him by the throat, lifting him off his feet with one hand. The casual display of power sent the 5th man scrambling for the exit. "This is what you were afraid of," Nora said, turning back to Victoria, who had pressed herself against the far wall. "Not that I was weak, but that I might be strong enough to threaten you." "You don't understand the forces you're playing with," Victoria snarled, but her voice shook with fear now instead of confidence. "There are others, alliances you can't imagine. Then they can come find me," Nora replied. "But right now, you're going to tell me exactly who else was involved in my parents' murder, and what other games you've been playing with Alexander's life." The warehouse door exploded inward with a sound like thunder, and Alexander burst through with a fury that made the air itself seem to vibrate. His eyes blazed with pure gold, no longer human, and the power radiating from him made Victoria drop to her knees in instinctive submission. "Nora," he breathed, covering the distance between them in inhuman strides. When his hands found her face, when his presence enveloped her like a warm embrace, the pain in her chest finally eased. The mate bond, strained to its breaking point, settled back into place with an almost audible snap. "I felt you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "The bond, the pain, the moment you awakened. I left the council session the second I realized what was happening. Your chance at the crown means nothing if I lose you." Alexander pulled her against his chest, his arms tightening around her, as if he could shield her from the entire world. "Nothing matters if I lose you." As Victoria's remaining accomplices surrendered, and the immediate danger passed, Nora realized that her awakening had changed everything. Not just her abilities, not just her understanding of what she was, but her perspective on what truly mattered. The choice between love and power wasn't really a choice at all. Not when love was the source of all real strength. Chapter 7. Crown of Hearts. The Sterling Mansion's grand ballroom had been transformed into something that resembled both a wedding chapel and a coronation hall, with white silk draping from the crystal chandeliers and hundreds of candles casting golden light across the marble floors. Representatives from every major shifter territory in North America filled the space, their formal attire unable to disguise the predatory awareness that marked them as apex creatures. Nora stood before an antique mirror in the mansion's master suite, adjusting the intricate silver circlet that would mark her as Alexander's claimed mate. The delicate metalwork incorporated ancient symbols she was only beginning to understand, each curve and line representing promises that would bind her life to his in ways that transcended legal marriage. "You're nervous," observed the elderly woman from the council, whose name Nora had learned was Moira Blackthorne, one of the few remaining keepers of the old traditions. Her weathered hands were surprisingly gentle as she arranged the silver-white silk of Nora's ceremonial dress. "Terrified," Nora corrected, meeting the woman's pale blue eyes in the mirror. "3 weeks ago I thought I was human. Now I'm about to participate in a mating ritual that will supposedly stabilize my supernatural abilities and bind me to the most powerful alpha in the region." "Not the most powerful," Moira said with a slight smile. "That title belongs to Edmund, and only for another few hours. But Alexander will be the strongest alpha king we've had in generations, especially with you beside him. I still don't understand how I'm supposed to help him rule. I barely understand what I am, let alone how to use whatever abilities I have." Moira's hands stilled on the dress fabric, her expression growing serious. "Child, what happened in that warehouse 3 days ago was just the beginning. Your awakening was triggered by extreme stress, but it was incomplete. Tonight, when you accept the mate bond fully, when you allow Alexander's power to merge with yours, you'll discover what the Wynn bloodline was truly meant for." A soft knock interrupted, before Nora could ask for clarification. Patricia entered, her usual efficiency tempered by what looked like genuine affection. "Miss Wynn, Alpha King Edmund has arrived. He's requested a private audience before the ceremony." Nora's stomach clenched with new anxiety. "Did he say what about?" "No, miss. But Alexander is with him in the study. I believe they're discussing the succession." As Moira made final adjustments to the ceremonial regalia, Nora caught sight of herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. The silver circlet caught the light like captured starfire. The flowing dress enhanced her natural curves while maintaining an ethereal quality that seemed to highlight the supernatural changes happening within her. She looked like someone who belonged in this world of power and ancient traditions. The question was whether she felt ready to claim that belonging. The study doors were closed when Nora arrived, but she could hear voices from within, Edmund's commanding tone mixing with Alexander's deeper responses. She raised her hand to knock, then hesitated when she caught fragments of their conversation. "Unprecedented situation, Alexander. The council has never had to consider a candidate who abandoned the selection process to rescue his mate. I made my choice, Edmund. I'd make it again. Even knowing it cost you the automatic succession you'd been promised. Even knowing that some members now question your commitment to leadership." There was a pause, and Nora pressed closer to the door, her enhanced hearing picking up the subtle sounds of movement within the study. "My commitment to leadership is exactly why I chose to save her," Alexander said finally. "A leader who would sacrifice someone he loves for political gain isn't a leader worth following. And a mate bond strong enough to compel such choices is exactly the kind of power foundation this territory needs." "Interesting perspective," Edmund replied, amusement coloring his voice. "Very different from the political calculation I expected. You expected me to choose power over love. I expected you to understand that sometimes they're the same thing." The door opened suddenly, and Edmund stepped out, his pale eyes finding Nora immediately. "Ah, perfect timing. Come in, child. We have much to discuss." The study felt different from the last time she'd been here, charged with an energy that made her skin tingle with awareness. Alexander stood beside the massive fireplace, resplendent in formal black clothing that emphasized his commanding presence. When their eyes met, she felt the mate bond pulse between them, stronger now than it had ever been. "Nora," Alexander said, her name carrying layers of meaning she was still learning to interpret. "Your Majesty," she replied to Edmund, offering the slight bow that had become natural in his presence. "Dispense with the formalities," Edmund said, settling into one of the leather chairs with the careful movements of someone much older than his apparent age. "Tonight marks the end of my reign and the beginning of something unprecedented in shifter history." "Sir?" Edmund's smile was sharp and knowing. For 300 years, the Alpha King position has passed through political maneuvering, demonstrations of strength, and careful alliance building. Tonight, it passes through love. Nora felt Alexander's surprise through their bond, his controlled composure cracking slightly. "Edmund, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that your choice to abandon the council session, to risk everything for your mate, was the final test I needed to see passed." Edmund leaned forward, his pale eyes intense in the firelight. Any alpha can dominate through force. Any politician can manipulate through calculated moves. But true leadership requires the courage to choose what's right over what's expedient, even when the cost seems unbearable. "The succession," Alexander began, "was decided the moment you left that meeting to save her," Edmund interrupted. "The council spent 3 hours debating whether such behavior showed weakness or strength. The vote was unanimous. You are to be crowned Alpha King tonight, immediately following your mating ceremony." The news hit Nora like a physical blow, her enhanced senses picking up Alexander's sudden tension, his carefully controlled breathing, the rapid acceleration of his heartbeat. Through their bond, she felt his mixture of triumph, relief, and overwhelming responsibility. "There's more," Edmund continued, his attention shifting to Nora. "Your awakening has confirmed something I've suspected since I first met you. The Wynn bloodline doesn't just carry dormant shifter genetics. You're descendants of the original bond weavers, humans who served as living conduits for pack power." "Bond weavers?" Nora asked, the term resonating with something deep in her genetic memory. "Individuals capable of amplifying and stabilizing the supernatural abilities of others, particularly their mates. Your ancestors were the hidden strength behind every great alpha line in history. When you fully accept the mate bond tonight, you won't just be gaining supernatural abilities of your own. You'll be unlocking Alexander's full potential as well." The revelation made Nora's head spin. "I don't understand." "Amplifying how?" "Watch," Edmund said simply, then turned to Alexander. "Show her your wolf." Alexander's form shifted smoothly, bones lengthening and muscles expanding as he dropped to all fours. His wolf form was magnificent, larger than any natural animal, with black fur that seemed to absorb light and amber eyes that glowed with intelligence. But there was something restrained about him, as if he was holding back significant power. "Now," Edmund instructed Nora, "place your hand on him." The moment her palm made contact with Alexander's fur, everything changed. Power flowed between them like an electrical current, and Alexander's wolf form seemed to expand, his already impressive size increasing by half again. His eyes blazed with golden fire, and the air itself vibrated with the force of his presence. Nora gasped as she felt the connection deepen, her own abilities awakening in response to his enhanced power. Her senses exploded outward, allowing her to feel the heartbeat of every person in the mansion, to taste the emotional currents flowing through the assembled guests, to sense the supernatural energy signatures of creatures for miles in every direction. Alexander shifted back to human form, his breathing heavy, his amber eyes wide with amazement. "I've never felt power like that." "Because you've never had a true bond weaver as your mate," Edmund explained. "Together, you two will be stronger than any Alpha King in recorded history. Separately, you would have been formidable leaders. United, you'll be unstoppable." The weight of responsibility settled on Nora's shoulders like a physical presence. "And if I can't handle it? If I'm not strong enough?" Edmund's expression gentled. "Child, you survived your parents' deaths, built a successful career from nothing, resisted alpha compulsion, and awakened supernatural abilities under extreme duress. You've already proven your strength. Tonight, you simply claim it officially." A knock at the study door interrupted them, and Patricia appeared with her usual impeccable timing. "Your Majesty, Mr. Sterling, the guests are assembled. The ceremony may begin at your convenience." Edmund rose, his formal demeanor returning. "Alexander, are you prepared to accept the crown along with your mate? With Nora beside me, I'm prepared for anything. And you, Miss Wynn, are you ready to become Queen Luna to the most powerful shifter territory in North America?" Nora looked at Alexander, seeing her own mix of terror and determination reflected in his amber eyes. The mate bond hummed between them, no longer just a connection but a source of shared strength that made the impossible feel achievable. "This marriage means everything," she said softly, echoing and transforming the title that had brought them together. "And yes, I'm ready." As they walked toward the ballroom where their future awaited, Nora realized that somewhere between blackmail and supernatural awakening, between political arrangements and genuine love, she had found exactly where she belonged. Not as Alexander's political asset or supernatural amplifier, but as his equal partner in building something greater than either of them could achieve alone. The ceremony that would bind them together was about to begin, and their real journey was just starting. Chapter 8. Forever Bound. 6 months later, Nora stood on the terrace of the Sterling penthouse, watching the sun set over a city that had become truly hers. The view from the top floor of Sterling Tower encompassed the entire territory that she and Alexander now ruled together, stretching from the urban center where human and shifter businesses operated side by side, to the wilderness preserves where packs could run free under the moon. The transformation hadn't been easy. Assuming the role of Queen Luna, while simultaneously learning to control her awakened abilities, had pushed her to limits she hadn't known existed. But with Alexander's steady presence anchoring her, with the mate bond providing both strength and stability, she'd not only survived the transition, but flourished in it. The council meeting ran long. Alexander's voice came from behind her, warm with the affection that had replaced the careful politeness of their early interactions. Margaret Rothschild wanted to discuss the integration protocols for the European territories again. Nora turned to find him loosening his tie, the formal attire of kingship giving way to the relaxed intimacy of their private moments. Even after months of marriage, the sight of him still made her pulse quicken, the mate bond humming between them with perfect contentment. "Any progress?" she asked, moving into his arms with the natural grace that had developed as her supernatural abilities fully stabilized. "More than expected. Your proposal for graduated revelation protocols has impressed even the traditionalists. 3 more territories have agreed to implement the program. The graduated revelation protocols were Nora's innovation, a careful system for introducing humans to the existence of shifters in controlled stages, allowing for better integration between the two populations. It was slow, methodical work, but already showing promising results in reducing the fear and hostility that had historically divided their worlds. Speaking of impressive," Alexander continued, his hand settling at her waist with possessive tenderness, "Patricia tells me you handled the Morrison situation beautifully this afternoon." Nora smiled, remembering James Morrison's shocked expression when she'd calmly dismantled his latest political maneuvering with a combination of legal expertise and supernatural insight. "He's still adjusting to the reality that I'm not just your decorative human anymore." "You were never that," Alexander said firmly. "Even when we both thought you were human, you were the strongest person I knew." The mate bond pulsed between them, carrying not just his words but the absolute sincerity behind them. It was one of the most profound changes in their relationship, the way the supernatural connection allowed for complete emotional honesty. No lies, no hidden agendas, no carefully constructed facades. Just truth, in all its beautiful and terrifying completeness. "The anniversary dinner preparations are finished," Nora said, changing the subject before the intensity of their connection could distract them entirely. "Edmund seemed genuinely pleased when I told him we were planning something special. He deserves celebration. 6 months of peaceful transition, successful integration of 3 new territories, and the lowest interpack conflict rates in recorded history. His mentorship made all of this possible. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights were beginning to twinkle on, creating a tapestry of human and shifter life intertwined. Street lamps illuminated sidewalks where families walked together, some fully human, others carrying the subtle scent markers that identified them as shifters. It was still fragile, this peace they'd built, but it was real. "Nora," Alexander said, his voice carrying a different note now, one that made her attention snap to him immediately. "There's something I need to tell you." "What is it?" She studied his face, seeing excitement mixed with nervousness in his amber eyes. Dr. Reyes called with the test results. The words made her freeze. They'd been trying for children since their mating ceremony, both eager to start a family that would carry on the unique combination of their bloodlines. But month after month had passed with no success, leading to medical consultations that had revealed surprising complications. "And?" she asked, hardly daring to breathe. Alexander's face broke into a grin that transformed his austere features into something boyish and radiant. "You're pregnant. 8 weeks along." The news hit her like lightning, joy and terror and overwhelming love flooding through her system in equal measure. Through their bond, she felt Alexander's matching emotions, his protective instincts already roaring to life at the confirmation that she was carrying their child. "Pregnant," she repeated, the word feeling strange and wonderful on her tongue. "Our child will be the first true hybrid of Alpha and Bond Weaver bloodlines in over 2 centuries, Alexander said, pulling her closer. "Dr. Reyes says the combination of our genetics should produce abilities unlike anything we've seen before." Nora thought about the implications, about raising a child who would inherit both Alexander's alpha dominance and her own Bond Weaver gifts. The responsibility was staggering, but so was the potential. Their son or daughter would grow up in a world where humans and shifters lived openly together, where supernatural abilities were gifts to be celebrated rather than secrets to be hidden. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, resting her hand on her still flat stomach. "With you, I'm ready for anything." Alexander's hand covered hers, warm and protective, though I suspect our child is going to keep us on our toes from day one. Considering their parents, that seems inevitable. A soft chime from the apartment's communication system interrupted their moment, and Patricia's voice followed immediately. "Your Majesties, Alpha King Edmund has arrived for dinner." "We'll be right down," Alexander called back, then turned to Nora with raised eyebrows. "Ready to share our news? With Edmund?" He probably sensed the pregnancy before we did. "Probably," Alexander agreed with a laugh. "The man has an uncanny ability to know things before they happen." As they prepared to rejoin the world of royal responsibilities and political complexities, Nora took a moment to absorb the magnitude of how much her life had changed. 6 months ago, she'd been a lonely lawyer running a struggling firm, carrying the weight of her parents' betrayal and believing herself to be fundamentally broken. Now she was Queen Luna to the most powerful shifter territory in North America, pregnant with a child who would reshape the supernatural world, and mated to a man who loved her with a completeness that still took her breath away. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked as they walked toward the elevator that would take them to the formal dining room. "The way we started, all the manipulation and blackmail and political necessity." Alexander stopped walking, turning to face her with an expression of such tender intensity that her heart clenched. "Never. Not for a single moment, even though you could have chosen anyone? Someone who understood your world from the beginning? Someone who wouldn't have needed months of training and adjustment?" "Nora," he said, framing her face with his hands. "You are my world. Everything else, the crown, the power, the politics, it's all just backdrop to the life we're building together. I would choose you again in every lifetime, under every circumstance, because you make me not just a better leader, but a better man." The mate bond flared between them, carrying the absolute truth of his words directly to her heart. In response, she sent back her own truth, the love that had grown from blackmail and business arrangement into something that transcended every barrier they'd faced. "I love you too," she said, the simple words carrying the weight of 6 months of transformation, struggle, and triumph. Now and always. As the elevator doors opened and they stepped into their future together, Nora felt the final pieces of her identity settle into place. She was no longer the broken woman who'd been abandoned at an altar years ago, no longer the struggling lawyer trying to honor her parents' tainted legacy. She was Nora Sterling, Queen Luna, Bond Weaver, and soon-to-be mother to a child who would bridge 2 worlds. But most importantly, she was Alexander's mate, his equal partner in love and power, chosen not for political convenience but for the strength of her heart and the courage of her spirit. The dinner with Edmund passed in a blur of congratulations and planning for the future, the old Alpha King's delight in their news evident in every word and gesture. As the evening wound down and they retired to their private quarters, Nora found herself thinking about the title that had brought them together. "This marriage means nothing," Alexander had said coldly all those months ago. How wrong they'd both been. This marriage meant everything, had become the foundation upon which they'd built not just their own happiness, but a better world for everyone who would come after them. And as Alexander pulled her into his arms in the privacy of their bedroom, as the mate bond settled around them like a warm embrace, Nora knew that some stories were worth every moment of pain and uncertainty it took to reach their perfect ending.